Partnership to Engage, Reform, and Learn is a DFID-funded governance program that supports governance systems and processes to ensure effective policies, plans, and budgets, and to ensure that the three link together to deliver public goods and services. Our goal is to promote growth and reduce poverty among the citizens. My name is Margarita Aswani. I'm the Deputy National Program Manager for the Accountable, Responsive, and Capable Government Pillar of Pearl. I will be the anchor for today's webinar. Before we start the day, I would like to recognize the presence of the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Water Resources and Budget and Planning in Borno State, Hajia Mera Bunu, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Women Affairs, Borno State, Hajia Hawa Maimusa, the Permanent Secretary, Adamawa State Planning Commission, Felicia Stevens Omisaki, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance and Budget, Adamawa State, Mrs. Gaye Tumbasi, the Executive Secretary, Abia State Planning Commission, Dr. Mrs. Nena Chikezi, and the Executive Secretary, State Emergency Management Agency, Borno State, Hajia Yabawa Kolo. A very warm welcome to my sisters. Last time we saw each other was during the inaugural meeting of the Bay States Women in Governance Community of Practice in February 2020. That feels like a century ago, and so much has changed, and we do really miss you all. With us, we also have members of civil society, including the General Manager of Peace FM in Maiduguri, Fatima Yusuf Audu, the Chairperson of FIDA from Borno State, Fatima Shehu Imam, and the Chairperson for the National Council for Women's Society from Yobe State, Halima Kiari Joda. The participation for the webinar today cuts across both government and non-government actors from Bay States. The webinar today is organized by Pearl through the Women in Governance intervention. Our presenters are experienced public financial management and gender and social inclusion experts. The presentation on equitable budgeting will be presented by Titi Fakoya, Pearl's Jessie advisor, and the PFM presentations will be done by Jita Berry Ibe and Chris Rowe, who are Pearl's senior PFM advisors. The Executive Secretary from Abia State Planning Commission will share with us her experiences when developing equitable budgets. The Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Budget and Planning and Water Resources in Borno State, who's our chair for the Bay States COP, will make the opening remarks. I'm going to take you through a couple of housekeeping issues right now. Kindly use the question and answer function of Zoom to ask your questions while the presentations are on. At the appropriate time, we will open the floor for participants to ask questions. Please use the raise hand feature on Zoom to indicate that you would like to speak when we open the floor. When you are called to speak, please introduce yourself and the presenter that you're directing the question to. All participants will be muted, and we ask for everyone to also mute their videos, except if you're giving the presentation. Finally, the presenters will be running a poll during their presentations. Don't forget to vote, and the poll will be up on the screen for just a short time. I'd like to give you a short message about today. The increasing interest in equitable and gender responsive budgeting reflects the growing awareness of the importance of equitable public resource allocations, because often a significant gap can exist between equity commitments of governments and the programs and policies that are funded through the budget. Equitable budgeting is gender budgeting and more. Gender equity is critical, and we must begin to gather data that differentiates men and women. But we need to go a step further to look at which men and which women. We must also begin to gather data about the poor, the vulnerable, the elderly, and other marginalized groups. And we must budget accordingly to meet their needs to promote growth and development in our society. For the Bay States, this is even more important. Evidence has shown that there is a direct link between equity and peaceful societies. Inequity in access to public services and goods, and exclusion from policy and decision-making processes is fueling grievances against government, creates feelings of disenfranchisement, and can contribute to greater conflict. Women in government who often have firsthand experience of discrimination and barriers to governance because of their gender, are very well placed to speak on behalf of usually marginalized groups and are at the forefront of the reform for equitable policymaking and budgeting. We hope you will gain a lot from today's webinar and place our hopes on you for future peace and growth. At this point, I would like to call on Haji Amero to make the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. Good morning, all. Sorry, I'll skip all the protocols since we are already, Margarita has done the necessary introduction. And welcome to this program. I would like to give you an overview of what PEL has been doing to us, the Women for Governance has been giving us technical support. And that technical support, a lot of us have gained much, and then even in the appointment of positions, and some have even gone in for election and won election. And this is something that has not been able to, women have not been able to attend for a long time, especially in this up north. And I give examples by the deputy governor in Kaduna State, she's our member, Zainab Gimba. Her own was a real thug of war, an experience I wouldn't want any woman to go to experience, but it was worth it. She's now a member in the House of Representatives, and since inception, she's the third woman that has been elected into such offices. So we hope that with this technical support that we are getting, that we have more women participation in elected offices. And then even in the performance of our duties in the civil service, a lot of us have excelled. I, for one, I would say it was because of this technical support that I've been bolder, more confident, and then improved output. And, right now, I've been saddled with another responsibility of handling another ministry as a permanent secretary, which is a bigger ministry than this. And it's through our hard work and output that we are getting all this recognition. When Yaba joined Women in Governance, was in Women Affairs as a director, and today she's the chairperson of SEMA and doing very well. And then she's always overwhelmed by the work. So, and I would say for the offices, they are gaining more. And then one issue I would like to really reiterate is on the issue of our Rwandan visits. We were with this PEL Act took us to Rwanda, and we were led by the then head of service, and then the three other Libya states. So the federal government now is using that communique from Rwanda to reform the federal civil service. And other states are joining. My state has started, and I told them categorically that they should refer to that document, since I'm not on that committee, but I can contribute. So I told them that they need to have that document, they need to visit that document, because that document has a lot for us to learn from. And it is because of my Rwanda experience that some of what I saw in Rwanda have taken it back home. Recently, in water resources, we are going to go into this what we call memorandum of understanding with the workers. Some of the workers, especially those on the revenue generating aspect, we are going to go into memorandum of understanding, according to my commissioner. Because when I told him this story, he said, no, 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 permanent secretary will have to adopt that here. Then very much bought it. We soon start implementing them too. So I'm sure there are still those members on that committee of reform, civil service reform, that also visited Rwanda with us. So I've asked the committee to request that document from them, and then they'll be able to throw more light. And then I don't want to take much more time than I was given. In the issue of Bay, we at Bay, we have started our starting our responsibilities. We started with the issue of mentorship to our fellow civil servants. Unfortunately, it was this COVID that disrupted us, but nevertheless, we still continue, we try to strive. And then of recent, inshallah, we'll attempt to include this budgeting process into the 2021 budget. Inshallah, we'll try our best. Since I'm still in the budget, we'll push it. The permanent secretary, Women Affairs, is here. They are responsible for all these disabled, a lot of less privileged people in society. Their ministry is responsible for that. And inshallah, sensitize our people and see how we can include this budgetary system into our 2021 answer any question as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Haji Ameru. I have noticed that in amongst the attendees, we have got Kabura Kazama, the DFID Regional Coordinator. Kabura, if you can hear me, would you want to give us some remarks, some welcoming remarks?
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Kabura.
Yes.
Well, good to see you.
I just wanted to be a very we know how we need to be inclusive in everything that we're doing. So and I'm happy that this meeting has been organized, and I hope that we'll all come away with a lot of learning that we can put into practice in the Bay States. So let me not intrude on the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kabura. Very important. Thank you for all the support that DFID has been giving us. So as Kabura has said, we've got quite a bit of work to go through. So let me get started. Could I please call on Titi Fakoye, our Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor from Pearl, to start off the presentation on equitable and inclusive budgeting. Thank you. Good morning, Titi.
Good morning, Margarita. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for honoring this invitation to be here today. And I look forward to a very eventful and a very interactive afternoon or morning as we go on with today's deliberations. Thank you again. I'm excited. Women in governance, we are making great strides, aren't we? So this is a beautiful occasion for us. Having said that, I'll go straight on to the presentation. And the very first slide that I'll be talking about is we're starting from the beginning. What is a budget? I will not be presumptuous and say that say that we all know, but for those who do not know and for those who know again, the definition of a budget for the purposes of this meeting is the budget is the government's most important economic policy tool. That is it. A budget is the government's most important economic policy tool. It is what translates government's policies, government's political commitments and goals into the decisions on how to use revenues, and of course, not only revenues, all the other sources of income that the government has, how it translates to meet the state's competing needs. That is more or less what a budget is. It is what tells the government to put your money where your mouth is. What are your priorities and how do you allocate resources to meet these priorities? That's our working definition. So having looked at a budget, we now want to go on to say, what therefore is equity? What is a working definition for equity? How do we want to look at it? Equity tells us how to distribute goods and services across the society and how to ensure that a fair treatment is met for all citizens. Why do we need to treat all citizens fairly? First of all, to mitigate conflict. But beyond that, we must recognize and get a clear idea of this concept of equity. It tells us that something equitable is fair and reasonable. To be equitable is not just to divide things in half. No, equity takes into account all the other factors which may justify one group getting more or less than the other. Having said that, it becomes very obvious clearly that there's a correlation between equity and the level of conflict, be it physical, cultural, or structural violence in society. The more equitable a society is, the less conflict there will be, the more peaceful there will be. The more peaceful it will be. And moving on, I need to clear these two concepts. Equity leads to equality and not vice versa. Sometimes we think that, well, it's good to be fair, to be just, let's treat everybody the same. As you can see in the picture, when you have equality, that does not result in equity. It is when you recognize the vulnerabilities of the different categories of people in the society, those who are poor, those who are less abled, those who are young, those who are old, and you recognize and value these differences. That is equity. And until then, can we get equality? So equity leads to equality and not vice versa. Having said that then, it is important, let's look at another term, a term that we're going to be using quite a lot as we go on in this presentation. What is inclusion? Okay, we've looked at what a budget is, we've looked at what equity is, we've had a look at equality. Now let's see, so what is inclusion? Inclusion, I'll start with the one that we're more familiar with, social exclusion. Social exclusion is when certain groups are systematically disadvantaged because they are discriminated against. Now, interestingly, this meeting is taking place at this specific point in time in the globe when there are riots and protests in many cities and people are frustrated and angry and they're demonstrating that the system has discriminated against them. Social exclusion, which is discrimination, it may be on the basis of ethnicity, basis of race, sexual orientation, caste, descent, gender, age, disability. There are many factors that exclude people, and the systems that promote these exclusions are those things that cause discriminations. And so what is social inclusion, therefore? Social inclusion is the reverse of exclusion. It is the conscious efforts that we need to take to make sure that we provide for those who are marginalized and disadvantaged. We have to work to reduce the social institutions, health services, education services that promote frustrations and increase the feelings of discrimination and create grievances towards the state and fuel conflict. Working against all of these things is to be inclusive, and that is what social inclusion is. It's a conscious and deliberate effort to minimize social exclusion. Moving on, I'd like us to take a look at the picture that we have in front of us. This, for me, illustrates what it means to be excluded by disability. This picture represents a public library, but then again, it could be any public institution. It could be a hospital, it could be a school, it could be any public institution. And you can see how this person, because of their disability, they do not have access to this building. Now, if it was a man, okay, maybe other men will carry him, but imagine if it was a woman, and if it was somebody's wife, who's going to be there? Which men? I mean, you know that men will be hesitant to be in such a position to carry this woman. In addition to the fact that it may be that time of the month for her. What am I saying? That when you're excluded by disability or by age or by all the other factors that I mentioned earlier on, exclusion is real and you're discriminated against by systems that exist. And so we have to work in a way that we're inclusive and that we promote equity in all that we do. Let's take a look at an example of what equitable and inclusive means. This picture clearly shows that one size does not fit all. One size does not fit all. We all come in different sizes, different vulnerabilities, different needs, different requirements. And as we can see, and as I have said earlier, they're young people, they're elderly people, they're persons with disability, especially when it comes to allocation of state's resources. And that's what we're looking at today when it comes to budgeting and how to go about it. We cannot treat everybody the same. We cannot treat everybody equally. Different groups of people need to be recognized and valued and treated appropriately. So this is what this picture gives a clear example of what equitable and inclusive means. So, what are the goals of an equitable budget? These goals will vary. Goals of an equitable budget vary according to political and social contexts of each country and of each state, because we all live in different realities. So, but whether they are different or not, the structures are the same, the principles are the same. So an equitable budget must aspire to make governments accountable. An equitable budget must raise awareness among citizens and promote equitable and peaceful societies. Those are the broad goals. However, the context of each state may be, those are the broad goals of an equitable budget. Having said that, why is it important? Equitable and socially inclusive budgeting, why is it important? It is important because it considers the different needs of women, men, and other groups and it looks at the differential impact of policies in each group. I'm saying this because oftentimes policies are gender blind, gender neutral, and the differential impact, this means the impact of a policy on a man is different from the impact of a policy on a woman or on a child or on a teacher. There's so many different ways in which the same policy impacts people differently. So an equitable and socially inclusive budget will consider the different needs of men and women. It will foster meaningful access to public goods and services. It will make sure that the government has thought carefully of the needs of the different groups of individuals, and that the finances and policies, that the policies and the finances are distributed accordingly. It contributes to build a fairer and more peaceful society. As I said earlier on, there is a direct correlation between conflict and discrimination and frustration in societies. And that is why equitable and socially inclusive budgeting is very important, particularly at this point in time. So having said that, we'll take a quick poll now and look at what we've said. Are we ready for the poll? So, ladies and gentlemen who are present here, do you think your state budget is equitable? If you think so, tick yes. If you think it is not, tick no. And if you're not sure, tick not sure. Just a quick poll. That's now that we know what equity is, we know what budgeting is, do you think your state budget is equitable? If you think yes, if you think no, and if you're not sure, tick not sure. Please click on your screen and submit your answers. This is just a quick poll to see how we feel. We have about 2 minutes to do this. Please click your answer. Do you think your state budget is equitable? Do you think it is inclusive? If you think so, please click yes. If you're not sure, click not sure. And if you're sure it is not, then click no. Oh, wow. Thank you very much. Thank you. The poll results are up now. 12% of the people think, yes, my state budget is, is equitable. That's very good. 48%, an overwhelming majority, have said, no, my state budget is not equitable. Okay. There's a 44% of the people who have polled have said, well, Titi, I'm really not sure. So yeah, I think I'd like to stay here. Whatever it is that you have polled today, ladies and gentlemen, I am happy. This webinar is for you. Even those of us who think that, or who we know that our state budget is equitable, great, there's room to learn more. For those who know that it is not equitable, there's room to learn more. And for those who are not sure, by the end of this webinar, we certainly will know better now what to do and how to go about it. So thank you, Ayo. Having said that, I'll hand over now to Chris, who will take us through the Pearl Equitable Budgeting Guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. Thank you, Titi, for your explanation of equity and inclusivity. I feel the visualizations make it very easy to understand. Before I move on, we are going to have another poll of the audience to find out if colleagues from the Bay States and further afield already have tools for mainstreaming equity and social inclusion in their policies, planning and budgeting processes. We'll give participants a few seconds to respond. Okay, Io, are we ready to look at the poll results? Okay, interesting. Quite similar in terms of the results from the last poll, but I think as we can see, the majority, or 50%, say you do not have any tools at the moment to promote GESI within the budget. So I think that underscores the importance and the usefulness, we hope, of this guide. We will now move on to look at the Pearl Equitable Budgeting Guide itself. So, firstly, why have Pearl invested resource to produce and launch this guide? It is an acknowledgement that traditional policy making and budgeting might perpetuate discrimination and inequality. In recognising this as an issue, the guide was developed to familiarise those concerned and involved in the budget process to fight for equity and inclusion. The guide was developed based on years of experience across a number of states and beyond the shores of Nigeria, and is reflective of experience across a number of disciplines. Ayo, can we move to slide 14? And one more. Yep. The guide introduces and describes equality and social inclusion within the context of budgeting and explains why it is important. It then goes on to describe the 4 stages of the budget cycle, breaking each into a number of steps. It provides tools and guidance to assist all relevant stakeholders to incorporate and recognise equity and social inclusion throughout the budget cycle. This includes descriptions of best practice, key considerations, and other useful resources. The guide should be used to adapt and potentially supplement existing budget processes to mainstream equity and inclusivity. A number of checklists have also been developed and are included in sections 3 and 4 of the guide. These allow stakeholders to assess the extent to which existing processes and outputs from the budget cycle are equitable and inclusive. As noted previously, there are a number of actors involved within the budget cycle. Government, including the Executive Council and civil servants in line ministries, are key drivers of the budget process. This includes both the oversight agencies, for example, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning and Budget, as well as those who actually collect and spend money, so Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Works, and alike. The guide is also useful for State House of Assembly members, who are the key conduit between civil society and government, and have the role of ensuring that policy priorities are appropriately reflected in budgets and in actual expenditure. Last, and by no means least, civil society can use the guide to help identify the appropriate stages, steps, and mechanisms for engaging with government, with the aim of ensuring that their needs are identified and appropriately reflected in the budget. The main section of the guide, section 3, contains diagrammatic presentations of each of the 4 stages of the budget cycle, identifying the activities, outputs, and responsibilities. The diagrams, an example of which is shown on the slide, are the initial reference point for users of the guide, who can then focus in on the steps and stages they are interested in. Each step is described in detail, identifying key equity and inclusivity considerations. These are intended to guide states to adapt and potentially supplement their existing processes and outputs to mainstream equity and inclusivity. The checklist can be used as a diagnostic tool to assess the extent to which existing practices recognise equity and social inclusion, and can be used to further hone in and improve any stages and steps that fall short of what is needed. The guide goes into a lot of detail about the stages and steps in the budget cycle and contains some quite technical terms and principles. It assumes a reasonable degree of prior knowledge of public policy, budgeting, and broader aspects of public financial management. It also assumes an interest in equity, gender, and social inclusion, with the overall aim of integrating what might have been viewed as 2 quite separate areas of development and capacity building. I will now hand over to my colleague Chidiebere Ibe, who will give a brief overview of the content of the Equitable Budgeting Guide based on the 4 stages of the budget cycle. Thank you.
Chidi, are you ready for us?
Thank
Oh,
you
there's
very
Chris.
much, Chris. Thank you very much, Chris and Madam Titi, for that brilliant explanation of what equity and inclusive budgeting is and how the Pearl Equitable continue. I would like to find out how many of us already collect and present disaggregated budget and service delivery data by sex, that is male and female, by age groups, that is children, youth and elderly, and by income groups, by differently abled groups, or by hard to reach locations. So we do a poll again, and we'll take about 20 to 30 seconds to respond to this poll. Ayo, can you put it up?
Judy, the poll is up.
Okay. So do you think—
I'm voting.
Yeah. Do you think your state budget contains data or information disaggregated by sex, that is male and female, by age groups, children, youth, and elderly, by income groups, the poor, the middle income, the high income, by disability needs, or by location, hard to reach areas especially? If you're sure, you can say yes, you tick yes if our budget is well disaggregated, or yes, but it's partially segregated, or no, if the budget is not segregated at all, or if you don't know, you tick the fourth option. The disaggregation of budget and service delivery information or data will help policy makers to target the various populations in the state, especially to ensure that there's equity in the distribution or allocation of resources. We have a result now, okay? 5% says yes, the budget is well disaggregated. 27% says yes, the budget is partially segregated. And 50% says no, the budget is not disaggregated, which means a majority don't disaggregate their budgets. And 18% says they are not sure, they don't know. So I think it is now imperative that we begin to see how we can disaggregate our budget and service delivery information. By the end of this section of the presentation, we'll be able to see some indicators that we can use to disaggregate the budget and service delivery data in our states. So let us now look at how to promote equity throughout the budget process. Budget is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. It is and should be a tool for policy implementation. Budget expresses government's priorities in a financial plan for implementation over a period of time, usually a year for annual budgets. If budgets are not policy-oriented, then chances are that public resources may be frittered away on things that do not address the needs of the citizens. So it is important that we look at the linkage between policy, plan, and budget. The linkage between policy, plan, and budget is achieved through the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTEF, which is a top-down decision-making about resource allocation and a bottom-up determination of needs. The diagram on this slide 20, which can be found on page 9 of the guide, illustrates the MTEF process. It starts with the determination of average resource envelope for the state, otherwise known as the medium-term fiscal framework or the fiscal policy, to achieve the overarching state policy priorities as contained in the state development plan. This aggregate resource envelope is the state to guide the sectors in formulating and costing their plans and state development plan. The broad sector resource allocation constitute the medium-term budget framework. And sectors receive resource allocation according to the state's priorities. For instance, if education is the highest priority of the state, it may be allocated the highest percentage of the available resources compared to other sectors. The sector envelopes are shared among is within that sector, and these form the ceilings within which the sectors and MDAs cost their projects and activities. The costed projects and activities form the basis for annual budget submission by the MDAs. It is important that we understand this concept of MTEF, because oftentimes there's misunderstanding of it, and people think that the annual budget is just an empty ritual, but the annual budget is a rigorous process that starts from the state's overarching policy document into the plans of the sectors on implementing those policies, and then translating them into the annual budget, which is a financial plan to action those policy intentions for budgeting, and indeed for an equitable and inclusive budget. Details to look at the 4 key stages in the annual budget process. The figure in this slide illustrates the core annual budget cycle and the documentation or output from each stage in the cycle. First is the budget planning and preparation stage, in which the state sets its strategic policy priorities for the annual budget, drawn, of course, from the state development plan. At this stage, the annual budget calendar or timetable, which guides the various budgeting activities for the year, is formulated and issued. Also, the budget core circular, which provides amongst other. Hello, Margarita.
Yes, Judy, I can see you. I'm not sure what's happening with the slides, though.
Can I continue from the 4 stages of the budget process?
Yes, I think so. I think we need to put up the presentation on the 4 stages. If I can have either Ayo or Ibrahim do that right now, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry for the bad connection. Maybe I could mute my video
so maybe.
To maximize the bandwidth.
Thank you. So we've got your slide up on the 4 stages of the budget cycle. Sorry, Judy, if you can take us through that again, that we'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the 4 stages of the budget cycle are illustrated on the slide. Let us look at it in a little bit of detail. The first stage is the budget planning and preparation stage, in which the state sets its strategic policy priorities for the annual budget, which is drawn from the state development plan. At this stage, the annual budget calendar is issued. And the annual budget calendar is to guide the various activities for the budget year. Also, within this stage, the budget core circular, which provides and the sector MDA resource envelopes and formats or templates for the budget preparation and submission, is also issued. There's also bilateral discussions between the Central Budget Agency and MDAs during this stage of the budget cycle. This provides opportunity for the MDAs to justify their proposed estimates. Also in this stage, civil society groups representing marginalized groups and various citizens' constituencies are meant to engage with the sector and MDAs to ensure that their interests are adequately captured in the budget. And what emerges from this stage is the draft proposed budget, which will be sent to the State Executive Council. This is a very important stage because it is the formulation stage of the budget and it is correct. The next stage is budget approval stage. There are two levels of approval of the budget. The executive approval by the State Executive Council and approves the draft proposed budget, sent to it by the Central Ministry, it becomes the proposed budget, which the governor then presents to the State House of Assembly for their constituencies should participate in public hearing on the budget at the State House of Assembly. And the key outputs of this stage is the approved budget or the annual appropriation law for the state. The third stage of the budget cycle is the implementation or execution stage. This is a very crucial stage of the budget and is oftentimes the most problematic. There's often a tendency for budget to be distorted at the stage of implementation, either deliberately or unintentionally. But there are key tools that can enable an orderly implementation of the budget. These include capital budget work plans or budget profiles, procurement plans, cash plans, and regular budget performance reports, which will point to the budget holder whether things are progressing well or not. And where it becomes absolutely necessary, like in the case of this year with the COVID-19 outbreak, there could be
Chidi, I'm very sorry we can't hear you. Ayo, is it possible to put on the recording from here? Can you mute Chidi and put on his recording, please? Thank you. If the participants could just bear with us 1 minute.
Otherwise, people who implement the budget should stay on course and implement the budget diligently as made in order to achieve the policy intentions of the budget.
Chris, are you there? Are you able to take over Chidi's presentation if your connection is better than his?
Hi, Margarita. Yes, that's no problem.
That's fine. So, yeah, let's put up the slide on the budget implementation on the 4 stages, and if you can take over since you have a script, and then we can see if Chidi can join us. Chidi, your connection is absolutely terrible. I'm really sorry. I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Margarita. I think let's pick up from the 4th and final stage, which is monitoring, evaluation, and oversight stage. This is important to ensure that those who implement the budget are supervised and held accountable for the resources put in their charge to produce and deliver public goods and services. Internally, the Central Budget Agency and other centre of government agencies should monitor budget implementation or aspects of it to ensure they are on good course. Also, civil society, especially the target beneficiaries for particular projects, should be involved in monitoring of budget execution and their domains. The State House of Assembly should also provide oversight function to ensure that the budget they approved is executed as intended. Finally, the Auditor General provides continuous audit and annual statutory audits to ensure that financial rules and regulations were followed in the implementation of the budget, and provide the audit reports to the Public Accounts Committee of the State House of Assembly for scrutiny and necessary action. Okay, let's look at the actions that can engender equity at the budget preparation stage. There are 4 key actions to be taken during budget preparation to ensure that equity is mainstreamed at this stage. First is to define or identify who the marginalised groups are and what their needs or preferences are, and this has to be done with the political and cultural context of the population involved. Second is to generate a list of equity indicators that can enable measurement and achievement of equity considerations in the budget. Third is to analyse the budget allocations with respect to equity considerations. And finally is to deploy the tools for gender responsive and socially inclusive planning and costing for projects in the budget. To ensure that equity is mainstreamed during budget review and approval, we need to confirm and validate that the demands of citizens groups, especially the vulnerable and marginalised, are included in the budget. These groups are often championed by relevant CSOs or CBOs. Secondly, we need to ensure that the budget is accessible to citizens in the language and media that are within their reach. For instance, translation of the budget into local languages or dialects such as Hausa, Kanuri, and Fulani languages, and making the citizens' budgets widely available to the population. There should be equity throughout budget implementation as well. This can be achieved through equal access or even preferential access to local, medium, small, medium-sized enterprises in procurement for budget implementation. Especially at these times of COVID-19 pandemic, small businesses are struggling to survive. They should be given a fair chance to participate in government procurement without compromising value for money. Secondly, there should be appropriate disaggregation of budget execution data to reflect the target beneficiaries in a measurable manner. Thirdly, in the event of a supplementary or budget amendment, as we are witnessing this year as a result of COVID-19, allocations to disadvantaged groups must be protected. Diverse groups such as CSOs and CBOs should be involved in budget implementation. They should know who have been awarded projects and contracts and get involved in monitoring project execution and protecting assets at project sites. Finally, there should be an effective monitoring and evaluation framework to enable tracking and measurement of beneficiary incidents in budget execution. The budget monitoring, evaluation and oversight must also have equity considerations. And these can be achieved by improving the collection and analysis of disaggregated data, ensuring that financial and non-financial budget monitoring reports include equity measures, that external evaluation and analysis of budget spending include equity indicators, and finally, that CSOs representing marginalised groups are involved in the process of monitoring, evaluation, and oversight. Let's look at some examples of equity indicators. Though equity indicators are often complex to define, they are designed to measure service coverage across differentiated social and economic groups and should be consistent with service delivery specifications and charters. Some output level equity indicators might include maternal death rates by LGA, number of loans awarded to abled male, female, youth, and male, female disabled youth under small business initiatives, provision of water for certain number of beneficiaries, including the number of male or female children, youth, and other groups. Percentage of schools accessible to disabled students, or percentage of disabled children having access to special education facilities. These are just some examples. Within all sectors, you would be able to think of others that are relevant to equity and inclusivity. Thank you very much for listening. Apologies you've had to hear more of Chris Rowe and less of Chidiberi Ibe. I will now hand back to the moderator, Margarita, for the next session.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate it. Thanks for stepping in. Chidi, thank you for the scripts. First of all three of our moderators, I have, thank you, Tidi, on equitable and inclusive budgeting. Chris, you did a good job giving us the an indication of just the types of checklists that we have available in the guide and the type of tools that are available through it. And Chidi, thank you very much. One of my favorite slides, as you know, is the policy and budget linkage. I think that's a very important slide for anybody who's working in governance, whether on the government side or civil society. Just to let our participants know, before I introduce Dr. Nena to the podium, we have available for you after the event, the guide, which includes all the checklists and the resources, of course, the PowerPoint, and our three presenters were very kind enough to even put together scripts. So if your connection was poor, or and of course we apologize, where we were also having some technical difficulties, all of that information will be made available to you. Without wasting any more time, Dr. Nena, can I call on you please to share your experiences with us about equitable budgeting in Abia State? Thank you. Hi, Dr. Nena. We're not hearing you. Oh, we can see you. Great. Thank you very much. Good to see your face. We can't hear you very well. Is it possible either to increase the volume, or I'm not sure how your speakers are working or your microphone? If you can hear me, what we will do is Pearl will reach out, Ayo will reach out, and we will record the presentation and offer it as a video to participants at a later time. I'm very sorry because it's just not sounding good at all. Ayo, if you can please mute Dr. Nena. Dr. Nena, my apologies, please.
Maybe Titi can take her presentation if she has it.
Yes, Titi has it. Titi, are you happy to go through the Abia State presentation, and then we can also record a video of Dr. Nena later?
Yes, I'm happy and I'm ready.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm handing over to you. Thank you. Dr. Nena, my apologies again.
Okay. So how did it all begin in Abia State? In 2018, Pearl was working through the Southeast Hub. And of course, the Southeast Hub is Pearl's domain. And we recognized an issue that the women in governance could take over. So the reform agent in the Abia Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development at that time, it happened to be Dr. Nena Chikezie. She was then the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development. And recognizing her as a reform agent, as many of you know, means that we began to give her technical support. So through the Southeast Hub, Uchoma worked closely with her and with various consultants at different times. And we provided them technical support in gender mainstreaming. We showed them exactly what the difference was between gender and social inclusion and how to begin to work towards gender responsive budgeting. When I say we showed them, this is the team of the Southeast Hub, and including the consultant, working closely with Dr. Nena and her team. And this was support given to the Ministry of Women Affairs. There was also technical support given in leadership management, of course, through the Women in Governance initiative, as some of you may be familiar with, and then peace and conflict resolution as well. So these were the added skills and technical support and capacity building measures that were given to Dr. Nena and her team when she was in the Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development. Going on from then, we then began to identify with Dr. Nena the processes that were, can I have the next slide, please? Identify the gender-based MDAs. So this was what was called the phase 1 activities. Gender-based MDAs, of course, all MDAs are gender-based, but which MDAs in the public sector actually interface with those, directly interface with those who are very, very vulnerable. So of course, MDAs like education, health, women affairs, and so on. And what Abia State did was they recruited gender desk officers in these identified MDAs. Please remember that this is a statutory requirement of the National Gender Policy that MDAs must have gender-based officers. So this was what Abia State did. Having recruited them, there was a period of training for these desk officers so that they know what their roles and responsibilities are. Now, this training was also courtesy of Pearl Arc, and the gender-based officers began to recognize themselves as the gender champions of the MDA. And then this training included a very critical component that each MDA had to start thinking equity, thinking about gender responsiveness, thinking about equitable considerations in their own budgets in the various MDAs. We also trained them, part of the training included helping them to identify gaps that make budgets inequitable and non-inclusive. So looking at the poll that we had a few minutes ago, you know, once you begin to recognize that your MDA has some gaps in it, once you begin to recognize the concept of equity, you can identify the gaps. And then you begin to build the advocacy and say, how do we address those gaps? So that was very critical part of the phase 1 activity that happened in Abia State, training them to identify gender gaps and make the budgets equitable and inclusive. Can we have the next slide, please? So, building on the advocacy, part of it was to identify critical stakeholders for advocacy and sensitization. Now, this is where it differs from state to state, from MDA to MDA. And the context, as I said, you know, will be very different. But having said that, identify your critical stakeholders. Is it the Office of the Governor, the Head of Service, Budget and Economic Planning, budget information, and so on and so forth, and enlist their support and buy-in. It works better, smoother, and easier that way. And this is learning from the Abia State experience. In addition to that, they then went on to develop the advocacy work plan. And they began to strategize with the gender champions, gender desk officers, and how do we meet these critical stakeholders? So the stakeholder mapping has shown that these are the critical stakeholders. We must have a strategy for engaging with them. This was what Abia State did. Once they had that strategy in place, they began to carry out advocacy visits to the various stakeholders. And as they did this, it was important to measure the impacts and identify the gaps that needed to be covered. It wasn't, I mean, it didn't just happen like that. With further engagement with the stakeholders, they began to measure the impact. They began to look at the gaps and say, okay, we didn't see this. You are more familiar with your own MDA. We can see that there's this gap that needs to be covered if we must arrive at equitable budgeting for this MDA. So these are very critical steps that they went through in their process. Next slide, please. Having done that, they then entered what they called the phase 2 activity. So what happened in Abia State was they realized that the gaps revealed that there must be some further training for all the MDAs involved. So they escalated this training to all the MDAs, and they made sure that the officers involved in budget preparation were trained. At least most of them were trained in this identifying of the gaps and knowing what to do with it. They requested for Pearl support, and Pearl then exposed them to the importance of equitable budgeting. And as we have said, the entry point for equitable budgeting is gender responsive budgeting. What is the difference between how men and women are impacted by policies, by government policies? Yes. And going one step further, which men, which women? How do we even look at persons with disability, be it a man or a woman? How do we look at the elderly and all those who are not within the mainstream, the youth, the disenfranchised different sectors of the community? So in Abia State, once that was done, they were able to develop templates for equitable budgeting and circulate to members for validation. That was a critical step as well, developing templates for equitable budgeting and circulating to members of validation. I understand that Dr. Nena's audio is working. Does that mean that she will?
I would like to try and see if Dr. Nena can try to present. Otherwise, we'll come back to you if it doesn't work. But she's changed her device, so let's give her a chance. Thank you. Thank you, Titi.
Beautiful.
Hello, Margarita.
Oh, thank God, we can hear you so much better, Dr. Nena. Hi. So could you
Thank
take
you,
over?
thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful one. Thank you, Titi. So
Should we stick to this slide, or you're going to take over? What would you like us to do? Next slide or this slide?
No, next slide. Titi has done the first two. Let me go to the next slide.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, phase 3 activity. Intensify the advocacy with the State House of Assembly, Office of the Governor, and Budget and Planning in the state. We needed to do this because budgeting, so to say, prior to the time we began to have Pearl support was, we termed it political because it was not inclusive. People will always want things to be done in their constituency without considering whether what's the effect, the impact on the people, especially men, women, children, the vulnerable. So at this time, we needed to get them to be on the same page with us, with the CSOs that were in the GAT team, that is Gender Advocacy Team. We walked into the the governor's office, the Budget and Planning Commission, because I wasn't there then. And then the House of Assembly, we had to get the buy-in of the chairman, House Committee on Women Affairs, and chairman, House Committee on Appropriation, chairman, House Committee on Health, so that we make sure that everybody knows what we are doing and they will give us the necessary support. Then we moved ahead to get approval for the implementation of the budgeting process. We just didn't want it to be work that will be done without having the authority for implementation. What we did was to make sure that at the point of implementation, that this, the equitable budgeting will be considered. We have to know the number of people living with disabilities that been empowered maybe by skills or education or whatever. So, or women that have been empowered in any form, whether in scale acquisition or by giving them loan to trade. So there is need for implementation and there is need to measure the extent of implementation. That's why we sought for approval. And then we went ahead to ensure availability of data. Yes, at this point, we needed to collaborate with the Bureau of Statistics and know the male-female ratio and the physically challenged in our states who are disadvantaged, and in what way we can allocate resources to project lines that will affect their livelihood. That was the reason for making sure we had the data available for us before the planning phase. Then we partnered with the relevant MDAs responsible for budget process and to execute. Next slide. Yes. Achieving equitable budgeting in Abia State. For us, achieving equitable budget in Abia State has a singular factor that helped us to produce 2020 equitable budget. And that factor is team play. We made sure that MDAs, we had strong team built to carry out the process. Without the teamwork, we would not have succeeded because everybody was enthusiastic to make sure that the process was concluded, that we drove it to the end of it. The civil society organizations were there to support us. The House members bought into it. The head of service allowed all the desk officers to be in training whenever they needed to be in training. So we brought the permanent secretaries, the MDAs. So there was strong team play around the process, and that helped us to do well in achieving the equitable budget for Abia State in 2020. And again, there was high-level advocacy that resulted in strong collaboration with the relevant NDAs. We did not sit back in our different MDAs. We reached everybody we could reach. The civil society organization, the House of Assembly, the Commissioner for Information, because we needed him to air what we were doing. We needed him to air that people living with disabilities needed ramps around the offices, that they needed to be included in whatever we are doing. So there was inclusion through advocacy. That helped us a lot. And for us in Abia State, that was the journey so far. And we just started. You know, at the beginning, I said that it was for selected NDAs. So along the line, we did the trial this thing with 16 NDAs. 16 NDAs were chosen across the line NDAs for this first for the trial. And at the end of the day, it came out fine. Everybody now is looking at implementation. That's the journey so far. And it's still work in progress for us in Abia State. And in this meeting, I've learned a lot, and we will still need more support from to do better. Hello.
Hi, Nana, we can hear you. Yes, we've got your sample budget page up. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. If you look at the sample budget, we looked at, basically, we were looking at the projects and the programs along the economic sector and social sector as it affects men, women, and youths. And I look at this. And if we look at the components, I'm sorry, the device I'm using, I can't actually see well. It's a small device. And my site is, if you look at the components, we looked at the sector, the project description, the location, equitable indicators. And for these projects, we can say that if we do this, if there is, oh my God.
Nana, maybe you can walk us through the process. Ayo has expanded on the screen the template so we can see the equitable indicators.
Okay, let me take. I'm looking at.
Okay.
I'm looking at my device is so small. I'm looking at, I have one that I'm looking at here. I have some of it cut off completely. 500 men and 300 women, including 200 youths. We were planning for them in 17 clusters. And the time frame is that this project will be implemented in between Q1 and Q4. Wow. Margarita.
Yep. Nana, your voice is trailing off a little bit. If you're there, would you be able to just take us through roughly just maybe one of the projects?
So I think the beauty of this from an equitable perspective is the fact that there are indicators. What does not have an indicator cannot be measured, evidently. So one key thing that an equitable budget requires is for there to be an indicator. The indicator will help you to know that have we hit the mark, have we not hit the mark? In addition to the indicator, what is particularly endearing about this project is the time frame. So the indicators are smart, they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time framed. They also have persons who are responsible. This for me is just what is tripping about what Abia State has done. Ayo, can you scroll a bit? You know, that in identifying each project, we know who to hold responsible at any point in time. And then there's a project description, and then there's the location of, on all of that. I'm saying this because we're talking to a room full of Bay, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe State planners, and those involved in budgeting, and those involved in using state resources to distribute distributing state resources, and working with state policies and mechanisms. That's important. Abia State stands tall. I mean, I'm very proud of the work that Nena and her team have been doing. They stand tall in understanding this concept and running with it. And that's why we've called her to share her experiences today. Have indicators, make sure they're time framed, be sure of who's responsible, and look at the risks. When you look at the risk, how do you mitigate these risks? I think that's important to just note at this point in time. Is Dr. Nena back?
I'm not sure, Titi. Dr. Nana, can you speak up to see if we can hear if you're back? Dr. Nena, is that you?
Hello, Margarita, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry. I have wobbly network here. I'm sorry.
Not to worry. We're happy to hear your voice back. So
Okay.
Titi took us a little bit through the. Do you want to? Is there a next slide, or do you want to continue with this one?
I'm not even. Margarita, Titi can go on. The slides are not even on my device anymore, but I can hear you.
Okay, so Titi, if you can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you.
There is no next slide, actually. This is the last slide, but it provides an example for the Bay States and for anybody else who is thinking about what does an equitable budget look like. And this is what Abia State has done. Of course, every state has a different pathway. We looked at the goals, we looked at the steps and all of that. But the issue is, In Abia State, they chose specific MDAs, and the projects within those MDAs, the description, the location, they made sure that there were equitable indicators. And again, just to say that these indicators will change from project to project. But here, this is a water project, Margarita, and they're looking at men, women, and youths, the responsibility, the risks, and the mitigations. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Titi. Thank you, Titi.
A very important, a very important message that I heard from Dr. Nena was that we did not sit back. We piloted with 16 MDAs. I think this was something that Haji Amero as well was talking about the other day. Well, we are now at the point of the agenda where we can take questions and answers. I saw that Mrs. Gaitam Basi from Adamawa has a question, and then followed by Fatima Audu Yusa from Borno. So Mrs. Basi, can I ask you please to unmute your microphone and give us your question, please? Thank you. And who you would like to address the question to. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Beautiful picture of you. Thank you.
Okay, you can hear me well?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This is my first time participating on the platform, and it has been very interesting and encouraging. I'm just 4 months old as a permanent secretary in the budget department. And I want to be very active in the issues of inclusion, gender inclusion. So I want to know how I'm supposed to begin. That's my question.
Thank you, Mrs. Basi. So I will hand that question over to Titi and Chidi. So if the two of you can answer Ms. Basi on how we can help. And then when you're done answering, I will take the question from Fatima. Thank you.
Congratulations, Mrs. Basi. I think that's where I really want to start from. Congratulations on your appointment as the PS Budget and Planning. And I also want to hasten to add that you've got the support of Pearl behind you, you know. So having said that, the starting place for me would be to take a look at the guide that we're going to send around to you today. Take a look at it and then take a step back and assess. Right, now I know more, because this is an introductory thing. Now I know more about equitable budgeting, and I am more familiar with the processes. I am now beginning, and I can see, I know the capacities of my teams, I know what the risk factors are, I know what the MDAs are, who's involved there. I am now ready to start. So that, for me, would be the first step. Chidi, what do you have to add to Dr. Basi? What do you have to say? Beyond my very preliminary introductory first steps, Oga Chidi.
Congratulations, Dr. Basi, on your appointment. I think also you may have to learn a bit, one or two things from Abia that has already started doing something. I think they were in your position maybe a year or two ago. But I would like to add that it is important that you document a gender and inclusion policy, something that will guide the thought process of how gender and inclusion should be part of the policy process, because the policy process that drives the budget eventually. Because if you listen to the presentation, we had the state development plan, we had the sector strategies, and we had the budget. That's what we are talking about, policy, plan, budget linkage. If the state does not think about gender and inclusion at the policy making stage, it is unlikely that they will get it right at the budget stage. So now that you have a clean slate, being new in that department, And also being desirous of doing this, it is good that you start well from the first principles of having a, it mustn't be a big document, just a statement that says we have to have gender lens and inclusion lens in all our policy designs, and we identify these sectors or MDAs that will implement them, and so that when it is time for budget, people know that the budget has to go to the right places. That's what I have to add to what Titi has said.
Thank you, Chidi. So Mrs. Bassi, again, congratulations. So Titi is saying, reach out to Pearl. And on standby, I've got Yusuf Jajere, our Northeast manager for the Northeast hub for Pearl ARC. And Titi has said, reach out to Pearl. Chidi has said, take a look at the tools and document your policy statement. Yusuf, are you able to join us and give some more tips to Mrs. Bassi on what steps to take next?
Congratulations, Mrs. Bassi, on your new appointment as the Permanent Secretary of Budget and Planning. I think what will happen is from our own part, we'll offer you, and I think, an induction session. Although this may not be immediately due to the current pandemic, but as things ease, we will be able to reach out to you and
Yusuf, your network is letting you down. Alex, are you able to take over from Yusuf quickly?
Yeah, I will take over briefly. Thank you, Margarita. Mrs. Bassi, what my colleague Yusuf was saying is that it is entirely possible for Pearl Northeast to provide you with an induction session, a kind of an executive session to walk you through the different Pearl PFM tools, so the different public financial management tools that Pearl has developed, and to see how to use this tool to strengthen the current budget process in your states. So we will be very happy to provide such support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Fatima's hand, Fatima Audu Yusuf, her hand has gone back down, but I'd like to give her an opportunity to ask the question. And I have a question in the Q&A chat as well. Fatima, are you there? Okay, we seem to have, Fatima's got her hand back down again, and she hasn't asked the question. Later, she can raise it back up. Haji Amero, I see you've put your video on.
Yes. I want to just emphasize on one aspect of this budget system. That is the medium-term strategic sector plan, the MTSS. I feel it is very necessary in the implementation of this equitable budget. So I would, it is my own, are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you. Yes.
You are seeing me and I'm not seeing anything. So my suggestion is that we can take it like Abia said, like as I suggested the other day, we can take them step by step, and then we can start by identifying the MDAs that are concerned, and then pick them according to how we can handle them, because each MDA, for consideration, we will have to have a kind of data, enough data, like what ABIA has done. For every action point, they have their data on the data of the people they want to serve. Like the one they provided for water, so number of men, so number of women, so number of children. Then if one can be able to get that data in good time and readily available, I think it will make the job easier. That's my
Thank you, Hajia. Thank you. So I know you know how to link up with Dr. Nana, but I think there might be an opportunity going forward to also link up with her to get some additional information. She did say the journey is just starting, but they've only been at this for a couple of years. But I think since Borno has indicated that you would like to start this process in time for the 2021 budget, I believe some additional conversations can be facilitated between Borno and Abia, so you can learn from each other and see what can be done better. Would that be okay?
Yeah, thank you.
I think that, and I'm happy to see you and I are both wearing the same clothes this morning
I'm
or
wearing the
afternoon.
same.
Our women in governance cloth, very good.
Yes, very
Thank you.
beautiful actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Hajia. I've got a question for Chidi Berry. So Chidi, I will read out the question for you from the Q&A chat. Politicians only focus on being re-elected. Policymaking comes with its complexities and controversies for different interest groups. In order to achieve an equitable budget, what efforts can be suggested to provide a balance for the demand of the interest groups while ensuring that intended objectives are met and are sustainable? So Chidi, if you need to look at the question again, it's on the Q&A chat on the bottom, but that question is for you.
Okay, I will attempt to answer. I think it's an obvious fact that politicians are interested in electoral cycles, but also they're interested in knowing that people want to vote for them. So they would like to be seen to be doing the right thing or to reaching out to people who matter for the elections. And I think I was in one forum where they said that that 50% of the electorate actually, or people who vote at the elections, are usually women, more than 50%. So if a politician knows that it's actually those vulnerable groups, those marginalized groups that turn out more to vote at election times, then he may have an incentive to direct attention to them. But having said that, on the technical side, I think it is a matter of policy making, institutional arrangements, because we shouldn't just depend on the whims and caprices of an individual. So we should be looking to institutionalize equitable and inclusive budgeting in our government, and that's why we have developed this toolkit or this guide to help us do that. So we should be looking at how the structures of government set up in order to address the needs of every citizen to ensure equity and inclusiveness. So it might be a slow journey, but eventually if we are focused on it, we can get it done. It's only when we have such institutionalized measures and mechanisms that anybody who comes into office will have to toe that line. In some places, for instance, in Lagos State, there's a law on how to make public buildings more inclusive. So if you have such a law, if you're building a public structure, you put ramps. Okay, so nobody will repeal that law. And another aspect of what we need to do is to get the citizen side, citizens groups to advocate for inclusion and equity in the distribution of resources and provision of public services. I don't know whether this addresses your question. Thank you.
I think it does. Chidi, before I let you off the hook, we have a number of civil society folks here, including some folks from the media. How do you get civil society to advocate? How do we get civil society to advocate for more equity? How do we help?
Well, we have this guide which we have developed, and we can sensitize them with it. That is one way from our own side, and also the media should be interested in these kind of things, because they are there to advocate for all, especially the vulnerable. So, but from our own side, we can sensitize the media and civil society organizations with this guide, this equitable and inclusive budgeting guide we've developed, so that they will know the processes and steps to take, in advocating for this to the government. Yeah.
Thank you, Chidi. So at this point, I would like to open the floor for a few questions. I have one question from Aisha Hamza, who hasn't posted who she would like to answer, but how do we handle, the question is, since I've got Chidi on, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. How do we handle an MDA that does not support or share or give data for appropriate planning? What would you recommend? So how can we encourage MDAs to share data, or how do we handle that situation in the first instance? Chidi?
Well, it's ridiculous to see an MDA that refused to share data, government data in his possession. So I think there has to be, there has to be incentives for MDAs that share data, and also there has to be sanctions for MDAs that don't share data. I think one of the things that we have experienced working in the field is in the area of making budget returns, monthly budget returns to the Accountant General's office. We've seen MDAs that don't want to make the returns timely. So what government had done in some instances was to withhold their monthly or quarterly interest until they turn in their returns. So such measures could be taken to ensure that MDAs send in their data, the required data. But again, you have to be sure that they have the capacity to be able to generate and present the data in the way that you want them. So the ministry or the agency that is demanding this data, for instance, appropriate templates and procedures for them to capacitate the MDAs. It's easy for people to comply when they have the appropriate capacities to do a piece of work than when they don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Chidi. Oh, Hajamero, yes, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
I'm going to chip in a little bit in this regard, out of shared experience. After the preparation of our 2020 budget and then the passage, we wrote all the MDAs requesting for them to profile their expenditures. And as I'm talking to you now, we are not able to, that was in January, early January. And as I'm talking to you now, we have not been able to get feedback more than 30% or less. And it is the small agencies that even responded. And now, what we are planning is that we make it in our budget call circular. We intend to make it quarterly. We design it in such a way that the template will provide for quarterly input of their 2021 budget. And maybe that we are thinking that that might address the issue of people refusing to make submissions as and when requested. So maybe one part is that usually if you give them a template, they respond better than when you don't give them a template, just like an request for things just like that. So we include even in a call circular that this is how we want you to make your solutions.
So what you're telling me is you've done two things. You've given them a template that they can fill out easily, and I'm assuming that they know how to use it. And then what you're doing is you're asking them to fill it out on a quarterly basis rather than an annual basis, or was it monthly before?
No, the initial one, that was for the 2020 budget. We were thinking that after the passage of the budget, that is the approved budget for 2020, they should break it down into 4 quarters for us, according to their own activities, since we cannot decide for them what to do.
Sure.
So, but that failed. So that is why for the 2021 budget, we want, even at the call circular level, we want them to make their submissions quarterly for us, hoping that it will work better. So
when will you know if this has worked? Will it be by July now, or when do you expect the next?
Yes, when they make the submissions when they respond to the call circular.
For 2021.
For 2021.
I'd like to hear more about that whenever we get through this 2021 budget submission. I've got a question in the chat. So a question that has come up sometimes is about the time and resources available to government to prepare an equitable budget. We heard a bit from Dr. Nena. We're hearing now from you, Haji Amero, about the equitable budget preparation process. So in a period of a year when there's already a lot of pressure going on for government officials, particularly now with COVID-19, where we've had to realign the budgets to reflect the new priorities. So when is a good time to make a budget equitable? I'm asking Haji Amero for her experience. I'm asking Titi, Chris Rowe, Chidebere, Ibe, and Dr. Nena, when is the right time to start making a budget more equitable?
Well, we can start it right away. But as for us, we are waiting for the House Assembly to approve the reviewed budget because of this COVID-19. 2020 budget, we had to review it because of meltdown. And as soon as that comes out, we'll start sending call circular for the 2021, and we'll see how much. We'll sit down after looking at the guidelines on the preparation of this equity budget. We'll sit down, we'll look at it and see how many MDAs that will be able to take on this 2021 budget with this equitable budget. So we have to have the guidelines first, go through it, and then we'll be able to understand what the nitty-gritties about the equity budget before we will be able to know how many of the MDS we can carry out for the 2021.
So you're going to make some attempts now to carry some of for the 2021 preparation process, to have some of the MDAs come on.
Yes, please. Even if it's just one, I want to attempt this 2021 budget.
So thank you. So this is important, and we've got people from Borno, Adamawa, and I believe we have some folks from Yobe as well from the ministries. I guess the question that I would like to ask. Yes, sir.
Can I just add something to what Ajia has just said?
Please.
I think, Ajia, you have the opportunity now to include the guideline for equitable budget estimates in the core circular for 2021. It might just be a checklist at this time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things or so. It's in the guide that you can add in your core circular that will help the MDAs to think through, when they are making their budget, so that they have those considerations at the back of their mind, and you can see how many of them are able to turn in, their estimates with respect to those equity and inclusion indicators. So yeah, you have an opportunity in the core circular to include that part of your guidelines.
But you see, we have to have the capability of the MDAs and their buy-in to participate fully, because if and also some of them, like the health sector, I know they have a lot of data. The education sector, they have a lot of data, water resources, they even had their own MTSS. And then places, I'm not sure if they have their full data, like the women affairs, youth development. These are areas that I'm not very sure if they have data. But for health, yes, education, yes, these are places that I know will not have problems of data with their MDAs. So I think we'll have enough to start. We don't need to have, we cannot start everything, but there are those that have data at hand. I think it will be good to start with them.
Yes, and again, you might consider to have a point person in your ministry, or even in those MDAs, possibly have a desk officer, so that it's easy to capacitate people who can drive the process in those MDAs, just for consideration.
Thank you both. I've got a question from, well, I had a question. She keeps dropping on and off. I hope she's with us. I have a question from, yes.
Margarita, can I say something, please? I've had my hand up. Maybe you didn't see me.
I can't see your hand up, but I'm happy for you to please come in, Dr. Nana.
Okay, two things. Chidebere said Hajia, when Hajia talked about data collection, the problem.
Yes, Dr. Nana, go ahead.
Okay, so it's important, Chidebere mentioned having a point person in the MDAs. At times it's difficult getting data from MDAs, but there should be a way around it. One, I believe that every budget MDA has the control of all the planning officers in the state, in all the state MDAs. So you can always hold them responsible for any data that you want. That is where to start. All planning officers belong to the budgeting MDA. So anything you want concerning data from any MDA, you can always call their attention, you invite them for a meeting, you tell them this is what you want, and give them target, this is when to return it, to bring it in. That is one. Again, we talked about, there was a question on, in this pandemic era, how do you, with the pressure on resources, I believe that this is even the time for us to implement equitable budget because of the effect of the pandemic on in the society, especially towards women and the vulnerable group. If we start it now, it will now become the policy of the states. Like Chidebere said, we must work to get a gender inclusion policy. Yes, even an approval from ESCO is enough for you to go ahead and do that. And I believe that this is the time for us to go ahead and do it. Then, Hajia, you should equally work with your Bureau of Statistics. Look at the available data in the Bureau of Statistics. That will equally be a starting point. so that you will start from there. It won't be like we want to begin to generate data on that we take a whole year or 2 years or 3 years. What is the baseline data in the states that can help you begin to plan in these areas? So these are the few things I want to mention. And for us, the returns are monthly. MDAs make returns to 3 offices on monthly basis in Abia State. Office of the Accountant General, Office of the Auditor General, and the Planning Commission. At times, definitely we have MDAs that if you check within 2 months, you've not seen any of their returns. All we do is that we invite them for a meeting again. And like Chris said, there is always sanction. Once they know that there is sanction, you find out that quickly, some of them will make returns for 3 months in 1 week. And then that will tell you that everything they have it there is just for them to bring it up. So we must find a way to motivate people to work and make sure that we don't have a clog in the wheel of planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not letting you off the hot seat yet, Dr. Nena. We have a question for you in the Q&A box that's come from the National Council for Women from Yobe State, Halima Kiari Joda. And she has asked, what tool do you use in getting the percentage of the gender in your project? Are you able to explain what tool?
Hello, Margarita.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
So Halima from Yobe has asked, what tool are you using to get the percentage of gender in your budget?
The percentage of gender in my budget.
Yeah, what tool?
Yes, the first tool we used is to consider the level of exclusiveness.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How do you consider the level of exclusiveness?
Okay, when we started with Pearl, you know, the first thing they did was to take us on gender mainstreaming and then gender and social inclusion. During those 2 trainings, they tried to identify the gaps in our previous budgets. We brought the budgets to the training ground, and then looking at projects item by item along the economic line, they allowed us to identify, they brought to the fore the gaps, that these projects were just put there on political reasons. How many women were affected? We could not say. How many men were affected? We could not say. How many youths were affected? We could not say. So going forward, we found out that we had a lot of exclusiveness in our budgeting. And then we began to look along the economic lines, how to include people, especially in the economic and social sectors of the state. That was the very first tool that we used.
Excellent. I think that's something that those are PowerPoints and information that we also have available that we could share with Halima and Yobe. I have no more questions coming from the participants, and I know we've already gone about 20 minutes past the time that we had planned to be together today. I wanted to give an opportunity to Haji Amero to give us some closing remarks on behalf of the Women in Governance COP in the Bay States, and also my colleagues Alex and Yusuf from the Northeast Hub. So Haji Amero, could I please ask for some comments from you or some closing remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. And I thank all our panelists, especially the doctor from Abia State, whom I'll be partnering very soon. And and I thank all of you, and I would urge all the Bay States to work together towards this very important method of budgeting. and where we should be available for each other for consultations and then clarifications, while the PEL Act will be there to be moderating for us. I would want us to work closely, unlike before that we hardly communicate with each other, please. In fact, we should be having regular virtual meetings like this and be discussing issues together. So, Margarita, please, I hope you'll be able to facilitate such meetings for us from time to time. But at least I would want all the Bay states to start this process, equity budgeting process. Let's start together. At least we should always have a starting point, and then let's see how far we can reach. So on this note, I thank all of you for coming, and then we thank specifically PEL for giving us all the technical supports that we are receiving. It is really taking us to greater heights. And thank you very much, all participants, for participating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hajia. And again, I would be more than happy to make sure that my colleagues, we just took a very important first step today. And we actually, maybe this pandemic has been good for us. We don't have to rely only on face-to-face. We're all learning new tools on how to communicate better. And I know I'd love to see some great connections between Borno State and Abia State, North and South. For me, I think that's very important. And I'm sure Titi will help us. I know Chidi and Chris will help us on the PFM aspect. Can I hand over to Alex and Yusuf to give some closing remarks on behalf of the Northeast Hub? Alex, Yusuf?
Yes, I don't know if Yusuf is with us. If he's on, then I'll say a few words. Just repeating actually what Ajia and Margarita have said already. That first, we apologize for the small technical issues. That was a first for us, but I think it was still worth it for us to have this virtual meeting. Second is to tell you that, of course, all the materials will be shared with you through email. So watch out for your email. You'll receive also a small survey. So please give us your feedback. That's very important for us to make these events even more effective and helpful for you. I think, as my colleague said before, I think this is very timely because of the COVID-19 crisis that push us also to look more at the vulnerable groups in our society to make sure that everyone is protected and taken into consideration, but also because the season for budget preparation will start soon. So, and as my colleague said before, Pearl is very ready to help facilitate additional exchanges among you, between the different states, among different stakeholders. We'll be here to facilitate experience sharing, to facilitate also further learning and share additional tools. One last thing I would like to say is that we are not starting from scratch, so we should not be afraid of this equitable budgeting. I'm sure in your states you have already mechanisms that you can build on, like you can leverage, budget dialogues or MDAs, consultations, etc., to make the budget more equitable. So, well, that's a very exciting start, and I hope that we'll be in contact again and again over this new topic of equitable budgeting. Thank you.
Alex, thank you. I've just seen a hand up amongst the attendees. We've got our National Program Manager in Pearl Arc who's also here with us. If you can hear me, can you, you've got your hand up, so I wanted to give you a chance to speak. Are you there? No, if we don't have, I'm not sure. We had his hand up, and we would have welcomed some comments from Ifine if you're there. Otherwise, we'll take some final remarks.
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. Okay, hi, Ifine. Good morning.
Yes.
Afternoon.
Yeah, good morning. No, it's afternoon already.
Could you put on your video
hi.
so we can see? Oh, there you are. Hi.
Start my video. Okay, I have started my video. Okay, good. Now, I just want to say how happy I am to have joined this conversation this morning. Quite interesting and engaging in the process, listening, participants ask their questions, and the experience shared by Dr. Nena from Abia. For me, it's quite fulfilling as we navigate this whole process of making our budget more equitable. Again, casting my mind back several years ago in the previous program in SPARK that we have attempted to make budgeting process more gender balanced, and the transition from gender balance to equitable budgeting. And then of course the key point that has been made regarding where all of this starts, starting from the policy. The policy has to be equitable, and that will eventually feed into the entire budgeting process. So I just wanted to say a word of thanks to everyone and how excited I am to have seen this happen, and looking forward to seeing how participants from the Bay States or any other state that participated, taking these things forward in the 2021 budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ifine. We've got one more hand from civil society, so I'm going to give Halima a chance to speak if she can, because we haven't heard from them. Ifine, thank you. It was good to see your face today. Halima, are you there? Yeah, thank you. Halima, are you there? We've got your microphone muted, so we can't hear you. If you are, please unmute so we can hear from you. Otherwise, we're going to close the session.
Margarita, if you're not getting her, let us send in the writing after.
Hello.
Hi, Halima, is that you?
Hello. Good afternoon. Can
Good
you hear?
afternoon. Yes, go on.
Okay. I just want to give you the assurance that with this knowledge, we are going to work round the clock and see that gender equity is effectively inclusive in the budget. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Halima.
You're welcome.
I've got Yusuf, my colleague Yusuf. Yusuf, can I give you a chance to say hello?
Thank you, Margarita.
And maybe goodbye as well.
Yeah. No. All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And mine is just to, because almost all what will have been said in the closing remarks have been said by the previous speakers. Mine is to express my appreciation to all for being with us today. We thank you very much for your patience, and we wish you good afternoon and fruitful afternoon on the rest of the day. The last thing I will have said, we will follow up with the Northeast Women in Governance teams to see that some of these things have been put in place, particularly in the 2021 budget. So without taking much of your time, I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. So we will close the meeting now. As my colleagues have said, we will circulate all materials. Yusuf, you just heard his voice. He will be the one to be helping in the Northeast, but please feel free to reach out to each other. Thank you, and I
And for
wish
those
you all
that
a
don't
good.
know me, Yusuf, this
Oh,
is my
yes.
face.
Oh, let's see your face, Yusuf.
Oh, right.
You are hiding your face, Yusuf.
No, I'm not.
Hiding.
I'm not. I'm not.
Oh, I don't see you.
Oh, maybe the network.
I think the
what's
video
happening?
is muted by the host.
Yeah.
They should unmute his video.
All right. I think that they are doing that.
So we'll be checking up on you, Yusuf. Most
All
of the
right.
time.
All right, PS.
You have to make proper pledge now.
Yeah. No problem. You are welcome.
You'll not be hiding, you'll not be alone.
I am not hiding. Is the host that is I don't know what the challenge is. Is Ayo or Ibrahim?
They don't want us to see you, Yusuf.
Guys, so please unmute your video yourself.
I did that, and it's not.
Okay, maybe next time, Yusuf.
Maybe next time, and most of them know me, and I think it's for the purpose of Adamawa PS planning, budget and planning, and a few.
Yes,
all right,
budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fatima, if you're back on from Peace FM in my degree, you're welcome to give us some words. Otherwise, we will close the session. Hello, Fatima. Fatima, are you there? No, we're not hearing her. I'm going to go ahead and close the session. Thank you very much to all. And I wish you a good afternoon, a good rest of your week. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you, Margarita.
Nena, Dr. Nena, thank
you.
you. Thank you. Thanks, Chris, Chidi, Titi, all my colleagues, and all the folks from Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hajia. Thank you, Dr. Nena.
you
Thank
all.
you,
Everybody.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Chidebu.
much for.
Thank you,
Thank
Titi.
you. Bye.
Alice, thanks. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for participating.